Let me tell you something most doctors don't bother to mention. Not because it's complicated, but because it sounds too simple to matter. And yet, after decades of observing patients, I can tell you that some of the biggest changes in your body don't come from dramatic events. They come from small habits repeated every single day without question. And one of those habits, something you do every night without even thinking about it, might be quietly affecting your eyesight more than you realize. I've seen people walk into my office convinced that their vision problems were just part of getting older. They would say things like, "It's normal, right? At my age, this happens." And while it's true that aging plays a role, what most people don't understand is that the way your eyes age is heavily influenced by what you do daily, especially in the hours before you go to sleep. Because that's when your body begins one of the most important processes it has, repair. And here's where things start to get interesting. Your eyes are not passive organs. They are constantly working, constantly adapting, constantly trying to recover from the stress you put them through during the day. Every screen you look at, every bright light, every moment of strain, it all accumulates. And at night, when you finally close your eyes, your body tries to fix that damage. But it can only do that if it has what it needs. I remember a patient who had always taken care of themselves, ate reasonably well, stayed active, kept a consistent routine. But over time, they started noticing subtle changes. Reading became harder, especially at night. Lights seemed harsher. Faces in dim environments were no longer as clear. Nothing dramatic at first, just small shifts that were easy to ignore, until they weren't. They told me they assumed it was just age catching up, that nothing could really be done. But when I started asking about their daily habits, particularly what they were doing in the evening, something stood out immediately. Their nighttime routine lacked one crucial element, something their body needed, especially at that stage of life, but wasn't getting at all. And this is where most people go wrong. They focus on what they do during the day. They think about exercise, about meals, about hydration, but they completely overlook the importance of what happens before sleep. They don't realize that the last things you put into your body before bed can either support your recovery or leave your system without the tools it needs to repair itself properly. Your body after 60 is not the same as it was at 30. That's not a weakness, that's just reality. Your cells regenerate more slowly. Your circulation changes. Your ability to absorb and utilize nutrients is different. And your eyes, in particular, become more sensitive to these changes. They need more support, not less. And yet, most people give them less. What I began to notice over and over again was a pattern. The patients who maintained sharper vision longer weren't necessarily the ones with perfect genetics or expensive treatments. They were the ones who had small, intentional habits built into their routine, especially at night, especially before bed. And the ones who ignored those small details, the ones who assumed nothing needed to change, were the ones who came back with worsening symptoms. Not overnight, not suddenly, but gradually, consistently, until it became impossible to ignore. This is not about fear. It's about awareness. Because once you understand what's happening, once you see the pattern clearly, you realize that some of these changes are not as inevitable as they seem, that there are small adjustments, almost insignificant on the surface, that can make a meaningful difference over time. And one of those adjustments involves something so simple that most people overlook it completely. Something you can do tonight. Something that, if done consistently, can support your eyes in a way that most people never even consider. And the surprising part is, it has nothing to do with complicated routines, expensive supplements, or drastic changes. It comes down to something far more basic. What you choose to give your body right before you go to sleep. I remember a patient very clearly, someone who, on paper, was doing everything right. They walked every day, kept their mind active, stayed socially engaged, and had no major health issues. From the outside, you would assume everything was under control. But over time, they started noticing something subtle, something easy to dismiss at first. They told me that reading at night had become more difficult, not impossible, just uncomfortable. The words seemed less sharp. The contrast between letters and the page wasn't as clear. Streetlights began to look slightly blurred. Faces in dim environments lost definition. Nothing alarming, nothing urgent, just small changes that slowly began to interfere with everyday life. At first, they did what most people do. They ignored it. They adjusted, turned on brighter lights, held things closer, took breaks. They adapted without questioning why it was happening, because in their mind it was simple. This is just aging. But over time, those small adjustments stopped being enough. What used to be a minor inconvenience started becoming a limitation. Night driving became uncomfortable. Reading for longer periods became exhausting, and eventually they reached a point where they realized something was changing, and it wasn't getting better. When they came to see me, they weren't expecting a solution. They were expecting confirmation. They wanted me to tell them that this was normal, that nothing could be done, that it was just part of getting older. And in many ways, that's what people are used to hearing. But instead of starting with tests or prescriptions, I asked a different question. What does your evening look like? They paused, not because it was a difficult question, but because it was a question they had never been asked before. They began describing their routine. Dinner at inconsistent times. Sometimes something light, sometimes processed, sometimes nothing at all. A bit of television, maybe some reading, and then bed. Nothing stood out to them. Nothing seemed wrong. It was a routine they had followed for years. But that was exactly the problem. Because what they didn't realize was that their body, especially at their age, required a different level of support, particularly during the hours leading into sleep. And more importantly, their eyes, which had been working all day, exposed to light, strain, and constant use, were entering a critical period of recovery without the resources they needed. This is something I've seen repeatedly. People assume that if they're not actively harming their health, they must be doing things right. But the truth is, neglect is often silent. It doesn't show up immediately. It builds slowly over time until the effects become visible. Your eyes, like any other part of your body, depend on what you give them, not occasionally, but consistently. And when they don't receive the nutrients they need, especially during the body's natural repair window, they begin to decline in ways that feel normal, but are not necessarily inevitable. I explained this to them in simple terms, that their vision wasn't just fading randomly, that their body wasn't being supported properly at the exact time it needed it most, and that there was a very specific, very simple adjustment they could make that might help change that trajectory. At first they were skeptical, not because they didn't trust the advice, but because it seemed too easy, too basic, too insignificant to matter. But that's the part most people misunderstand. The body doesn't always respond to complexity. It responds to consistency. And the smallest habits, when repeated every day, often have the biggest impact over time. They decided to try it, not expecting much, just curious enough to see what would happen. And what happened next is something I've seen more times than I can count, but it still surprises people every time. Because when you give your body what it needs at the right time, it responds. Sometimes in subtle ways at first, but those subtle changes are where everything begins. Here's where most people get it wrong. They believe that once their vision starts to decline, there's nothing they can do about it, that it's written into their genetics, that it's simply a matter of time. And because of that belief, they stop looking for answers. They stop questioning their habits. They accept something that in many cases could have been slowed down, or even partially improved. But your eyes are not passive. They are not just wearing out like an old machine. They are living tissue, constantly active, constantly adapting, constantly trying to repair the damage they accumulate throughout the day. And one of the most important things people don't understand is this: a large part of that repair process happens while you sleep. At night, your body shifts into a completely different mode. Your heart rate slows down. Your brain begins to process information. Your cells begin to regenerate. And your eyes, after hours of exposure to light, screens, strain, and movement, finally get a chance to recover. But recovery doesn't happen automatically. It depends on what your body has available. If your system lacks the nutrients required for that repair process, then your body will still go through the motions, but the results won't be the same. The recovery will be incomplete, slower, less effective. And over time, that gap between damage and repair begins to widen. That's when people start noticing the changes, not all at once, but gradually, subtly, until one day they realize something isn't working the way it used to. And this is where something incredibly simple comes into play, something most people overlook because it doesn't feel important enough. But it is, because timing matters. What you consume before bed has a direct impact on what your body can use during the night. And there is one specific fruit that I consistently recommend, especially for people over 60, not because it's popular, not because it's expensive, but because of what it contains and how the body uses it during that critical window of recovery. Blueberries. Small, easy to ignore, often seen as just another fruit in the grocery store. But inside them, there are compounds that directly support eye health in ways most people never think about. They contain powerful antioxidants that help protect the retina from oxidative stress, one of the main drivers of age-related vision decline. They support blood flow to the small vessels in the eyes, which is essential for maintaining clarity and function. And they help reduce inflammation, which plays a bigger role in vision problems than most people realize. But here's the part that makes the difference. It's not just about eating them. It's about when you eat them. When consumed before bed, these nutrients become available to your body during the exact time your system is trying to repair itself. It's like giving your body the tools it needs, right when it needs them most. And this is where that patient I mentioned earlier started to understand what was happening. Because for the first time, they weren't just reacting to a problem. They were supporting their body before the problem could get worse. And that shift, small as it seems, is where real change begins. I've seen what happens when people ignore these small things. And the truth is, vision loss doesn't arrive suddenly like people expect. It doesn't announce itself with a dramatic moment. It creeps in quietly. At first, it's just discomfort. Then it becomes limitation. And before you realize it, it starts to affect your independence. It usually begins in ways that are easy to dismiss. You need more light to read. Your eyes feel tired faster than they used to. Night driving becomes slightly uncomfortable. You start avoiding certain situations without even noticing why. These changes feel small, almost insignificant, but they are signals. Signals that your eyes are not recovering the way they should. And over time, if nothing changes, those signals become patterns. I've had patients tell me they stopped driving at night because they didn't feel safe anymore. Others told me they gave up reading because it became too exhausting. Some began to rely more heavily on others for simple things, not because they wanted to, but because their vision no longer allowed them the same level of independence. And what's difficult about this is that by the time most people recognize the seriousness of it, the damage has already progressed. Not because it was unavoidable, but because it was gradual. And gradual problems are the easiest ones to ignore. What most people don't realize is that your eyes are constantly exposed to stress. Every day they are working to process light, adjust focus, interpret movement. And unlike other parts of your body, you rarely give them intentional support. You assume they'll just keep working the same way they always have. But as your body changes, your eyes require more care, not less. And when that care is missing, the system begins to weaken. Not all at once, but steadily. This is why the smallest habits matter so much, because they compound. A small deficiency repeated every day becomes a larger problem over time. A lack of support during the body's repair phase leads to incomplete recovery, night after night, until eventually the effects become visible. And here's the part most people don't like to hear. By the time you notice a significant decline, your body has already been struggling for a long time. Your eyes don't fail overnight. They fade, slowly, quietly. And unless you intervene early, that process continues. I've had patients ask me, "Why didn't I notice this sooner?" And the answer is always the same. Because it happened gradually. Because it didn't feel urgent. Because nothing forced you to change. And that's exactly why it's important to act before things feel serious. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. Because once you understand how this process works, you realize that you are not completely powerless. You can't stop time. You can't prevent every change that comes with age. But you can influence how your body responds. You can support it. You can give it what it needs to function better, for longer. And sometimes that starts with something as simple as a small, consistent habit before bed. Something most people would never think twice about, but something that, over time, can make a meaningful difference. So here's what I tell my patients now. You don't need to overhaul your entire life. You don't need complicated routines, expensive supplements, or drastic changes that you won't be able to maintain. What actually makes a difference is something much simpler, something you can start doing tonight. A small handful of blueberries. That's it. Not a large portion, not something excessive, just a small amount, about 30 minutes before you go to sleep. And not once, not occasionally, but consistently, because consistency is what allows your body to adapt, to respond, to improve over time. What you're doing with this habit is giving your body access to specific nutrients at the exact moment it enters its natural repair phase. You're not forcing anything. You're not overriding your system. You're supporting it. And when your body is supported properly, it works better. Your eyes, after a full day of use, finally have the resources they need to recover. Blood flow improves. Oxidative stress is reduced. The small structures in your eyes that are responsible for clarity and focus receive what they need to function more efficiently. This doesn't mean you'll wake up the next day with perfect vision. That's not how the body works. What happens instead is more subtle. You may start noticing that your eyes feel less strained at night, that reading becomes slightly more comfortable, that your vision feels more stable in low-light conditions. Small changes. But those small changes are important, because they indicate that your body is responding. And over time, those responses begin to accumulate. The people I've seen maintain their vision the longest aren't the ones who rely on quick fixes. They're not the ones looking for instant results. They're the ones who understand that the body responds to patterns, not to isolated actions. They are consistent. They are intentional. And they respect the signals their body gives them. This is not about chasing perfection. It's about preventing unnecessary decline. Because once something is lost, it's much harder to regain. But when you support your body early, when you give it what it needs before problems become severe, you put yourself in a completely different position. You're no longer reacting. You're maintaining. And that shift is everything. So tonight, before you go to bed, I want you to pause for a moment. Think about your routine. Think about what you're giving your body and what you're not. Ask yourself a simple question. Am I supporting my body or just following habits I've never questioned? Because habits feel safe, but they are not always right. And the habits that worked for you years ago may not be serving you the same way today. Your body changes. And when your body changes, your habits need to change with it. That's not weakness. That's awareness. That's control. And that's how people maintain their health. Not through extreme actions, but through small, consistent decisions made at the right time. Your eyes have carried you through decades of life. They've adapted, adjusted, worked without complaint. And now they need a little more support. not something complicated, not something overwhelming, just something intentional. So the next time you prepare to go to sleep, don't overlook that moment, because what you do right before bed matters more than you think. And sometimes the smallest change is the one that makes the biggest difference. And let me leave you with one final thought. After all these years, after seeing thousands of patients, I've realized something that most people only understand when it's already too late. Health is not lost in a single moment. It's lost in the small things we ignore. It's lost in the habits we never question. It's lost in the routines we repeat without realizing that our body has changed, but our behavior hasn't. Your vision is no different. It doesn't disappear overnight. It fades in silence. It adjusts slowly until one day you notice that something isn't as clear as it used to be. And by that point, most people start looking for solutions. Stronger glasses, treatments, quick fixes. But what they don't realize is that the process didn't start when they noticed it. It started long before that, in the quiet moments, in the daily routines, in the small decisions that seemed too insignificant to matter. That's where everything begins. And that's also where everything can change. Because the same way small habits can lead to decline, they can also lead to preservation, to stability, to longevity. I've seen people in their 70s and 80s maintain remarkable vision, not because they were lucky, not because they had access to something extraordinary, but because they paid attention. They adapted. They made small, consistent choices that supported their body instead of neglecting it. They didn't wait for a problem to become serious. They acted before it needed to be fixed. And that's the difference. Not intelligence, not genetics, awareness. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Don't wait until something feels wrong to start taking care of it. Don't wait until your body forces you to change. Start now. Start with something simple, something you can actually maintain. Because the goal is not to fix everything overnight. The goal is to protect what you still have for as long as possible. So tonight, when everything is quiet, when your day is coming to an end, when you're about to follow the same routine you've followed for years, pause, just for a moment, and make one small change. Give your body what it needs before it asks for it. Because by the time it asks, it's already late. And the people who age well are not the ones who react. They are the ones who prepare.